Hello, my name is David Wells and I am delighted to be invited by the Catholic Curriculum Corporation to address this year's When Faith Meets Pedagogy conference. It's such a wonderful event and I've had the privilege of joining you on 3 previous occasions. So to be in and amongst you today is a heartfelt wish which is denied to us by the consequences of this pandemic. However, a great second best, for me at least, is to speak to you from my kitchen here in Devon on the south coast of England. And what a remarkable year, or couple of years really, that it's been. But here we are using the beauty of technology to reach out to one another on this remarkable theme of bearers of hope, guardians of the promise, stewards of creation. Wow. It's huge. So in 2 short videos, I'm going to offer 1 or 2 perspectives to help provoke and encourage and develop our understanding of what it means to be a bearer of hope, a guardian of the promise and a steward of creation. So let us move on then, if I may, and just take us back, my goodness, to before most of you were born, to the year 1965. I was 3. And that year, the Church promulgated by Pope Paul VI the document Gaudium et Spes. Translated means joy and hope. A remarkable document about the role of the Church in the world, and this is how it begins. Amazing. It begins with the joys and the hopes, it writes, the griefs and the anxieties of the men, forgive me, it was written in its time, of the men of this age, especially those who are poor or are afflicted in any ways. These are the joys and the hopes, the grief and the anxieties of the followers of Christ. What? What does that mean? It means the things that draw out people's anxieties and frustrations and disappointments, the worries of the world, should be the worries of the Church. Let me put it another way. The joys and the hopes, the aspirations and the enthusiasm of the world should also be the joy and the hope of the Church. So one of the reasons I begin there is to say that at this time, both our Holy Father, Pope Francis, and generally the culture is worried, concerned, anxious about creation, about environment, about sustainability, about living on this planet appropriately, recognizing it's not ours. That burden has been given especially, it seems, to the young. And so the Church should turn her heart and her eyes and her hands and her mind to those worries too. That's our role in the Church, to turn our attention to the things that disturb and trouble people, because the Catholic Church, right, is good news for the world. So if we're going to be good news to the world, we have to understand what worries the world, what troubles the world, and how we can bring about peace and healing and justice to those things that cause people worry. It's why we're forever asking, are you okay? Particularly the people we love. We'll say to the people we love all the time, won't we? Hey, you all right? You seem a bit down. You seem a bit worried. Why? Because I want to share any burden you're carrying. And the Church says that's us, the people of God in the world, wanting to hold, bear the disturbance, the anxieties and the troubles of the world. If our young people are worried about the environment, folks, so should we be. If our young people are worried about the future, about climate change, so should we be, because that's how we reach out to them. And that's how we become the hands, the heart and the head of Christ himself, reaching out into those circumstances. So let's just talk briefly about hope, because it's a good place to start, right? Now, hope is sometimes best understood. Hope is best understood probably when it's missing, Or what is the opposite of hope? In the Christian tradition is despair. And Pope Francis writes a little bit about this, usually in the early parts of his document. It's normally chapter 1 or chapter 2. And in the early parts of his documents, he'll often talk about things that cause us restlessness and sleeplessness and despair. And one of the things he talks about is what happens to us. You'll find this in Evangelii Gaudium 83. What happens to us is that when we lack hope, do you know what happens? We become small-minded. Yeah, our world shrinks. We become self-possessed. It all becomes about us. When we lack hope, we shrink. And Pope Francis talks a lot about this in his documents. He says sometimes our faith can be wearing down and degenerating into what he calls in Evangelii Gaudium small-mindedness. When we lack hope, our only intentions, our only prayers, our only anxieties are about our own needs. Hope always broadens the picture. It's good for us. It lifts us up out of our own small bubbles. And people who lack hope, Pope Francis refers to this in the Directory for Catechesis, often fall prey to one of two temptations. I like this. The first is idealism, where the problem feels so big and we're unable to grasp it, right? We can't solve it. We become sort of what he calls idealistic. And then the problem is just simply too big for us to tackle, and so we become overwhelmed, which can lead to the other temptation, which is cynicism. This is where we just say, oh, we give up. I mean, and we become pessimistic. These two temptations, idealism, where we think we should be able to solve a problem, and when we can't, we give up. And pessimism, where we just feel so overwhelmed, we don't even start in the first place. And these things turn us sort of into cynics, really. I mean, I think it was Oscar Wilde who said this: a cynic is somebody who knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing. See, your world shrinks. Or what about your own Ronald Rolheiser, marvellous contemporary theologian, who says a cynic is somebody who's given up but hasn't shut up, right? So what happens sometimes, faced with a lack of hope, the problems become too big for us to solve. And so we either feel inadequate because we're a problem solver and we're quite idealistic, or we just feel pessimistic because we simply can't face the enormity of it and we give in. We just say, oh, do you know, global warming, what can I do? So hope is really important because it lifts us out of idealism and it lifts us out of cynicism. It lifts us out of the idea that we can solve the problem ourselves, and it lifts us out of the idea that we can't solve anything. That's what hope does. Okay? Which is why in 1 Peter 1, I think it's 1 Peter 3:15, it's one of my favourite lines, Peter writes to us, he says, always be ready to give an account for the reason for the hope that you have. Stay hopeful. Don't give in. Don't give up. Nearly done this bit on hope, but I rather like it. I thought we'd have a quick look at what hope is. I really like hope as a virtue because it keeps me stronger. So firstly, and you're going to see this in all Pope Francis's exhortations and in his encyclicals, that often Pope Francis begins strangely by describing darkness. He describes a problem. You know, in the early chapter of Amoris Laetitia, Pope Francis talks about the problems families face. In the early part of Laudato Si, we meet the problems that the environment faces. In the early part of Fratelli, Tutti, we hear the struggles of those migrants and people who are marginalised and the poor. So what he often does is he begins with a scene of despair or hopelessness where things are broken. Why? Because for hope to be hope, the church teaches, there is a necessary surrender. We have to recognise that we are part of a broken situation. For hope to be hope, we have to recognise somehow that there is a lacking, a brokenness, if you like, some prospect which is required, which is absent. The situation is not as it should be. For hope to be hope, there is a necessary darkness. That's not bleak or depressing. It's simply aware of the circumstance. Let's go to the book of Lamentations. Lamentations, right? Not a book in the Bible we read very often in the Old Testament. But in Lamentations 3, we hear the author. Now listen to this. This is real desperation, right? The author writes, "My soul is bereft of peace." Have you ever been burdened like that? My soul is bereft of peace. I've forgotten what happiness is. Have you ever been so troubled by a circumstance beyond your control that you just want to feel normal? Then the author writes, "But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope." Right? It's going to give an account of the reason for the hope that he has, because he goes on to write, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies won't come to an end. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." You see what's happening there is he's in a period of suffering, bleakness, darkness, overwhelmed by troubles. "But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. This will not destroy me." So for hope to be hope, sadly, there is always a challenge, always a darkness, always a brokenness, always something not right. The second thing I want to say about hope is that hope sustains. This is Thomas Aquinas. You see, because hope is part of a threesome, right? Faith, hope and love. We read about this in 1 Corinthians, faith, hope and love. This is St. Paul writing, the greatest of these is love. But they are actually part of a Venn diagram. They overlap, these three beautiful gifts, theological virtues they are. And faith, hope and love are intertwined. So what are they, or what's the difference? Well, faith believes, love responds, and hope sustains us. Faith is for the daytime. Faith is what gets you out of bed in the morning. Love takes a picnic. It looks after other people. It's charity. But hope is what gets you through the night. Is that okay? That's in the story of the church. That's Thomas Aquinas. The third thing I wanted to say about hope, and I love this, is that hope can only hope in something which comes as a gift. If you can solve the problem in front of you, you don't need hope. What you need is fortitude. Get on with it. All right? Hope hopes in something beyond self, and therefore, whatever comes as a consequence of hope can only be received as a gift. All right? You can't resolve a hopeless situation with your own talents. If you could, you're called to get on and do something. So faith believes, love responds, but hope sustains us. Why? Well, because whatever emerges as a consequence of hope comes only as a gift. So hope leads to gratitude. The opposite, by the way, of that is when you meet people and what they've really done is tried to take control of all circumstances. This is traditionally known in the church as sins against hope, when we become what we call control freaks. What we do is we try to avoid any situation in which we are not in control. And that can lead to some dangerous cul-de-sacs problems for us, really, because we can become, in our efforts to avoid any financial risk, we can become hoarders. We can save for a rainy day and then save for another rainy day. And then one day we realise we've saved for a monsoon and people around us are in need. So what happens is we need to be careful not to try and take control of things beyond us. It's not just unkind, it doesn't work. That's what gathering into barns is all about. You see, you just build a bigger barn and you build a bigger barn, and it never really works for us. This is called sins against hope, when we start relying on our own abilities and stop trusting in God's, right? The fourth characteristic of hope, which I really love, and all of these are found in Catholic theology, is that hope has nothing to do with the chances of success. All right? It just doesn't. We hope because it's the right thing to do. We hope because it's a good thing to do. We hope for something because it's beautiful, right? Whatever is right, good and beautiful, we hope for. All right, because it's right, good and beautiful. It has nothing to do with the chances of success. All right, so we hope for a cleaner world. We might say it's beyond us, but it's right, it's good and it's beautiful. So we hope for it. That's what we do. And of course, to finish, the scriptures, in fact in Matthew's gospel, Jesus himself is named as the hope of the world. If you're not quite sure what to hope in, go there. So what I'm going to do just briefly for a few minutes is just ask you to consider just briefly, what gives you hope and what drains it away? And I'll be back in a few minutes to give some more ideas to this whole theme. Thanks for listening. Be back soon.